and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's program, the Israeli Defense Minister announces a major expansion of military operations in Gaza. Well, today marks exactly 1 month since Israel blockaded all aid from entering the enclave. On what has been dubbed Liberation Day, we ask, what will President Trump's barrage of reciprocal tariffs mean for the average consumer, and could this spark a global recession? Plus, we're going to be speaking to the British TV presenter James May and asking him what's true and what's not true about rumoured reunions with former Top Gear co-hosts Jeremy Clarkson and Richard Hammond. Hello and welcome. First, Israel has announced a major expansion of its military operations in Gaza. Well, the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, says that the army will be seizing parts of the Palestinian territory, and he confirmed that Israel would, quote, seize large areas that will be incorporated into Israeli security zones. Well, all the while, Egypt, Qatar and the United States are once again attempting to broker a ceasefire deal and secure the release of the remaining Israeli hostages still being held in Gaza. Well, let's get more analysis so we can speak to Chuck Freilich, who is the former Israeli Deputy National Security Advisor and Professor and Senior Fellow at INSS, that's the Institute for National Security Studies. He joins us from Tel Aviv. Professor, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. We've heard from the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, saying there's going to be a major expansion, he said, of military operations in Gaza. What's your understanding of what the rationale is for this expansion?
Well, I think that there are two primary ones. One is an attempt to force Hamas into reaching a hostage deal on better terms. And the other one is part of the longer-term overall strategy of trying to weaken Hamas, potentially dismantle it as the governing body in Gaza. And I mean, they have partly reconstituted in the period since the ceasefire began, so to weaken them again militarily as well.
So, I mean, it's been sort of 17 months of warfare in Gaza. I mean, it's very difficult to imagine what's left of Hamas. I mean, we've been told time and time again they've been severely degraded, but now we're being told that they're sort of making some sort of a resurgence. I mean, what is your understanding?
Well, they were severely degraded. They are severely degraded, but they weren't completely destroyed militarily. You have to understand that for organizations like Hamas or Hezbollah, for that matter, there is really no such thing as defeat. Unless you can kill every last one of them, which isn't realistic, then they will never concede. And it takes whatever amount of time it takes for them to begin military operations once again. Which is what happened here. So when I said before that they're reconstituting, yes, they are, but it's still at a low level. But if Israel doesn't deal with it now, it'll gradually become greater and greater, and they will eventually rebuild to the pre-war capability.
I mean, this is obviously devastating news, according to the hostage members' families. They have a forum called the Hostages and Missing Families Forum. They've said, quote, has it been decided to sacrifice the hostages for the sake of territorial gains? They seem to think that freeing the hostages has not been shown as the top priority. What do you say to that?
Well, it's not just the hostage families. Many people in Israel share that feeling that this government has not made the hostages their number one priority. Israel's history, it's part of its national security strategy was always what people perceived as an unwavering commitment to save Israeli citizens, whether it was nearby or even going to Entebbe if necessary. And so, yes, a lot of people share the feeling that this has not been the case today. And we see the demonstrations in Tel Aviv and around the country. It's a widespread sentiment.
And Professor, we also heard from the defense minister today saying that the Israeli army is going to seize what he said would be large areas of Palestinian territory that are going to be incorporated into Israeli security zones. I mean, do you think this is a long-term or even a permanent arrangement?
Well, it'll depend on various developments, on what Hamas does, on which government is in office in Israel. The elections will be no later than a year and a half from now, possibly earlier. Look, the real question is who is going to establish a stable, peaceful Gaza? And it's clear that that's not the case while Hamas is still there. Now, I don't know that they can be completely destroyed militarily. And you're saying, well, after 17 months, yes, it's been a long time. It's hard to imagine that there is some great new trick up Israel's sleeve that will change the situation fundamentally. We may be in for a situation for considerable amount of time now where there are ups and downs. There'll be lulls, there'll be periods of relative quiet, and then there will be periods when Israel will feel that it has to go in again to cut Hamas back down to size.
Back in February, we heard the defense minister announcing plans for overseeing what he called the voluntary departure of Palestinians from Gaza. I mean, when you hear that and you hear plans for taking territory from Gaza and incorporating it into Israeli territory, do you think we are looking at the start of this plan to relocate 2.4 million Gazan inhabitants? And where do you think they're supposed to go?
I don't know that there's any serious discussion of reincorporating parts of Gaza into Israel, but there is discussion of trying to implement President Trump's proposal on a voluntary basis. Look, without saying anything about the final resolution of Gaza, part of a two-state solution or whatever, Gaza in its current borders, given its huge population, huge for the size of the territory, its population rate doubles about every 20 years. So that today we're talking 2.4 million, let's say. So 20 years from now, we're talking 4.5 million, and 20 years after that, it's 9 million. Gaza isn't viable in a long-term sense in its current borders. So you either have to take an approach such as the one that was presented by Trump of trying to reduce the population, whether in the way that he said, or maybe some people want to move to the West Bank, or you have to change the size of Gaza's territory. And there's a long-standing, very interesting proposal for a multilateral land swap, which would double Gaza's size. Egypt gives Gaza land, Israel compensates the Egyptians, and the Palestinians agreed that for Israel to annex an equal-sized piece of land in the West Bank. And so actually in this scenario, no one has gained or lost net territory, but the Palestinians get territory where they really need it, Gaza, and Israel gets additional territory that it needs to be able to incorporate most of the settlers into Israeli territory.
What sort of a time frame will we be looking at for a plan of that nature, do you think? When could we see that become a reality?
Well, I'm not personally very optimistic that we're going to see a lot of forward progress on the peace process, certainly for the foreseeable future. I don't think that there is any Palestinian leader today who's capable of doing so. The Israeli government is not capable of doing so today. So I think we need to see a leadership change on both sides before we can see significant progress. And the proposal that I was talking about now, that idea also requires that Egypt agree to participate. In the past, Egypt has turned the idea down. I'm somewhat more hopeful that Egypt might be willing to give it more favorable consideration today.
I mean, when it comes to sort of plans and mapping out a way forward, I mean, today is a sad anniversary for people in Gaza because it marks exactly a month since food has been, and aid has been cut off to the Gaza Strip. No flour, no bread, no fresh water in some places. I mean, we are looking at possible hunger looming in some areas of the Gaza Strip, if not the whole Gaza Strip. I mean, is there a plan, or do you get the impression that the Israeli government sort of changes its ideas and its approach to the problems one day to the next?
First of all, there have been, I think, overstated claims of starvation, of famine in Gaza since the war broke out. By Gazans, by international aid organizations. If all of the statements had been accurate, then nobody would be left alive in Gaza today. Everyone would have starved. Now, I'm not trying to say that the situation isn't very difficult in Gaza. It is. But I don't think we're talking starvation. We're talking socioeconomic pressure on people. The other thing is people say, well, why is Israel doing this? The real question should be, why is Hamas doing this to its own people? Why did it start the war? Why does it still have 59 hostages 17 months later? Why is it continuing to fire rockets at Israel? Why are they reconstituting? Why don't they step down and allow a new and forward-seeking, peace-seeking government in Gaza to emerge? The people who are most responsible for Gazan suffering is Hamas.
Very hard to explain that to children who've lost one or both parents, siblings, and who are having to go to bed on empty stomachs, not for the first time this last month, but throughout these last 17 months. I mean, shouldn't Israel take the high ground here?
Well, I wouldn't use food as a significant source of leverage. And again, I don't think anyone is starving. It's hard very much to calibrate these things in a effective but still humane way. Again, the onus for resolving the problem should be placed on Hamas. Israel has no desire to make anyone in Gaza starve. No desire to do that. It's just simply, it's one of the ways. I mean, no one wants to see Israel use military force, okay? Don't use socioeconomic pressure. What are you left with? There aren't many things that you can do. So I think, again, we have to go back to the source of the problem.
A lot of aid groups we've spoken to would beg to differ on the issue of the famine situation, the starvation situation in Gaza, but neither of us are there. So let's move on. Hamas reported to have put forward a new ceasefire proposal to the Israelis. Few details have been made public. Are you hearing anything about that? And how would you expect the Israeli government to respond to that plan?
Well, I don't think we know the details of either the Israeli plan or the Hamas response, so I don't want to speculate. Just to say that it seems that both sides have an interest in a deal, and I hope we can reach one.
And just lastly, Professor, I want to ask you about this so-called Qatar Gate, something that's been gaining quite a lot of traction, making quite a lot of headlines in Israel and beyond. This is with regards to alleged links between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's aides and parties in Qatar that have financed them in exchange for favourable coverage. I'm just wondering how serious you think Qatar Gate is for the Israeli leadership.
Well, we'll see. The judicial process has begun. Two of his aides, one of whom is apparently the person closest to him today, have been arrested and are in jail. Others have been called to testify, and we'll see. I think the prime minister's response indicates that he is concerned about this. It's not something that he can just brush off. We'll see how it plays out. It's certainly a major legal challenge for him.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Professor Chuck Freilich, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Well, stay with us here. We'll be back in just a moment talking about the US President Donald Trump's barrage of reciprocal tariffs and asking what will they mean for the average consumer.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Welcome back. The US President Donald Trump has unveiled what's been described as reciprocal tariffs, taxes on imported goods from a broad range of countries. Well, that's with the goal of penalizing those countries for trade barriers of their own. Well, in the context of these new tariffs, the Trump administration is branding today as Liberation Day. Well, President Trump has already slapped import levies on products from Mexico, China, and Canada. And President Trump is promising that revenue generated from all these tariffs will be put towards US tax cuts and deficit reduction.
China's an abuser, but the European Union is very, very bad to us. They treat us very, very badly. They don't take our cars. They don't take our cars at all. They don't take our farm products, essentially. They don't take very much. We have a $350 billion deficit with the European Union. They treat us very, very badly. So they're going to be in for tariffs.
Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Mary Jo-Jacobi, former Assistant Secretary of Commerce under President George H.W. Bush. Mary Jo, you also served as a special assistant to President Ronald Reagan. Really good to have you here on Al Arabiya News once again. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us. The White House is saying that today, the 2nd of April 2025, is going to go down as being one of the most important days in modern American history. Do you think that's an exaggeration, perhaps?
I actually don't think it's an exaggeration. It is an historic day in many ways. It's not just because of the tariffs being announced later today, but it's also a day when the president will be negotiating tax reform and extension of his tax cuts with Congress in a meeting later this morning. And it's also TikTok Day, where the president will be meeting to decide the fate of that very popular Chinese-owned app.
Okay, but when you hear President Trump saying things along the lines of, America's trade partners have been ripping off the United States, would you tend to agree with that assessment?
I think when you look at the balance of trade, the United States has been running an incredibly large deficit for a long time, and a very large deficit with some very specific countries, not in the Middle East so much, but elsewhere in the world, particularly China, Canada, and Mexico in America's immediate view. And so what the president is seeking to do, as I understand it, is to try and create a rebalance there, which I support. Tariffs can be a very blunt instrument. I understand he's talking with his advisors about whether to just do a permanent universal flat rate somewhere between 15 and 25% on everything versus a case-by-case sort of retaliatory tariff structure, country by country, product by product. If I were advising the president, I'd go for retaliatory. I'm not advising the president, so we'll have to see what he announces later on today.
Okay, you have advised presidents, though, in the past, so your opinion is nevertheless very valuable to us. And just help us understand this. I mean, for people who don't have a very strong grasp of economics and the norms surrounding tariffs, I mean, Americans have obviously got a much higher disposable income than pretty much every other country, certainly the Europeans, and you mentioned the Mexicans and the Canadians. So doesn't it stand to reason that the flow of trade between the United States and those countries should be a little bit lopsided?
Well, in a way, it does stand to reason, but it also is affected by the American consumer's choice. And American consumers have had quite a lot of access to very inexpensive goods manufactured offshore, everywhere from China to Vietnam to Cambodia to India. Just look at the label inside any article of clothing bought in the United States, and it wasn't manufactured here. Over many years, 40 years perhaps, the manufacturing base of the United States has declined, and the American consumer has come to rely more and more on imported goods, cheap imported goods. When it comes to things like automobiles, however, higher-end Americans have chosen higher-end imported automobiles rather than American manufactured cars. And frankly, it's only Tesla and Rivian who actually manufacture all of their product in America, as opposed to, in many cases, crossing the Canadian or Mexican border many times before a car is finally assembled. So we've come to rely on less expensive imported goods at the expense of our manufacturing capability, which is a strategic capability, as well as manufacturing jobs, which tend to be lower paid union jobs. So a lot of the unions are supporting the president's approach to tariffs. A lot of the consumers are not. And then you have Wall Street and the stock markets, and they don't like uncertainty. And we have been in an uncertain world, knowing that tariffs were coming, but not knowing what those tariffs might be. And I'm hoping that the clarity the president provides today will encourage the markets. There might be a lot of pent-up demand for shares as prices have fallen considerably over the course of the last month. So I'm hoping that there'll be a stock market rally once we have clarity, regardless of what that clarity is.
Okay, so just to wrap up and summarize what you've just said there, good news for factory workers and their job prospects, because this will, we assume, create more factory jobs. Not so sure about the stock market. We'll see how things go on Thursday, during Thursday trade, but US stock index futures down pretty sharply the last day or two. But for consumers, not such good news, you're saying. And that would tie in, it would appear, with a study done by Yale that said that these tariffs could cost the average US household an additional $3,000 to $4,000 US a year. I mean, why would it cost American consumers money in the long run? What's the sort of the calculation that they've made there, do you think?
Well, because the price of anything imported, depending on the nature of the tariffs that the president imposes, anything imported will cost more to bring into the country and therefore more to sell at the coalface to the consumers. And so the consumers will pay. What the president hopes, what I hope, is that through this hopefully short-term pain of rebalancing, where things go up immediately, well, short-term, but balance out long-term, the consumer will get a better deal, the American economy will be stronger, and then when you amplify the tariff approach with the tax cuts that are coming, that the president is negotiating today, overall, the consumer will be in better shape later in the year. So a little bit of short-term pain in favor of long-term gain.
Okay, that's viewed from the point of view of US consumers. Now viewed from the point of view of other countries, and we've talked about China, Canada, Europe, Mexico, feeling some heat. I mean, who's going to feel the most heat, do you think, economically as a result of these tariffs? Which countries?
I think certainly China. And of course, you've already seen tariffs imposed on Mexico and Canada. And those are due to expire and will probably be renewed. But again, until we know, and I admire this White House for being able to keep things under wraps for so long. There has not been a leak to my knowledge, and I've been following this very, very carefully. Until we know what kind of tariffs on what and on whom, it's hard to judge who's going to suffer. I think it's safe to say that there will be a lot of pain in the immediate term. Hopefully, there will be a lot of gain in the medium to long term. And I mean this from a worldwide trade perspective, because many of us believe, some of us old schoolers, that the greatest peacekeeping force in the world is the interdependence that comes from trade. And so we're hoping that this rebalancing will not damage those relationships, but will sort of reset the international trading arrangements, which have not been reset for a very, very long time.
So how are countries supposed to respond? I mean, what's President Trump expecting the countries that are going to be the recipients of these pretty heavy tariffs? How's he hoping they're going to respond? Are they supposed to ask to come to the negotiating table? Are they likely, do you think, instead to perhaps get together and step up the heat themselves? What do you think is the next step?
Well, certainly the EU has been orchestrating or attempting to orchestrate a consolidated response on behalf of the member states. Both Canada and Mexico have issued statements saying that they are looking at retaliation rather than confrontation. They want to talk, and they have been talking. And China has retaliated in some cases already and will probably continue to do so, and is taking a more confrontational stance in their announcements over the last few days. So what I hope, and what I believe the administration hopes, the Trump administration, that this will bring people to the table, that they will talk, they will seek an overall rebalance. And I think one criticism that I would level against the administration is the way they've communicated this, because they have not really gotten out in front of the levels of tariffs that other countries impose on American exports. And if that were better understood from an American perspective, I think it would be easier for the American consumer to understand what's happening. But overall, I think worldwide, there's going to be some short-term pain here. I think the countries in the Gulf region are probably in better shape than most, because the United States enjoys a trade surplus with many of them. But it's going to really come down to who, how much, and how long.
They're dubbing this Liberation Day there in the United States. Is that how it feels to you, Mary Jo?
It feels like Difference Day to me, a day that we're making a major change in the way the United States has conducted its international economic affairs. I'm not sure it's liberation. I think Liberation Day will come when the U.S. manufacturing base rises and there are more manufacturing jobs and more goods available as made in America. And then we are not so dependent on inexpensive foreign goods. So it feels more like Difference Day to me than necessarily liberation.
And for the rest of the world, do you think we might be looking at the makings of a global recession, as some people are suggesting? And could that in turn boomerang back and have an adverse effect on the US economy?
Certainly, if there's a global recession, it will boomerang. But I am hoping, and I believe, that this will bring trade partners to the table to act either individually or collectively to work with the United States for a global rebalancing of the trade apparatus, which has existed in its current form for a long, long time.
Okay, so to sum up, I mean, would you say, as the Trump administration is saying, that we're about to see the restoration of the golden age of America, to use their own language? Is that how it looks to you?
Speaking as an American, I hope that's correct. You know, I love my country, but I'm also British and I love Great Britain. And so we will see. But it is a very big change. And change is frightening to many people. And I think as we rebalance, things will get better.
Okay, well, it could bring in $600 billion US dollars a year, these additional tariffs. I mean, that's not an inconsiderable sum of money, is it?
One does not sneeze at billions of dollars.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, Mary Jo-Jacobi.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us today.
My pleasure.
Now, changing gears entirely, James May, who is renowned for his roles in Top Gear and the Grand Tour, is making headlines once again. Well known for his dry wit and passion for all things automotive, May has recently announced a live stage tour, which is set to begin later on this year. There are also rumours he's going to be reuniting with former co-hosts Richard Hammond and Jeremy Clarkson for a special episode of the Grand Tour entitled The Not Very Grand Tour. Well, what's true and what's not? Well, we can hear it from May himself, who joins us now from London. James May, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us.
Pleasure.
Lots of rumours about a reunion between you, Jeremy Clarkson, and Richard Hammond. What's true and what isn't?
Well, I'm afraid it's not a reunion. The Not Very Grand Tour is essentially a best-of compilation. Hosted from the studio by me and Richard Hammond. Jeremy Clarkson wasn't available for some reason, but we're all in the clips. It's all things you've seen before, but chopped up in a different way.
You say for some reason. Does that suggest you're not in regular contact with Jeremy Clarkson?
No, we recorded it a while back. To be honest, I can't remember why he couldn't be there. He was probably busy.
Okay, you don't like the idea of comebacks, do you?
Yeah.
You've said about the idea of comebacks in the past. We're not Led Zeppelin, you said. What's wrong with a comeback?
Well, there's nothing wrong with the comeback. I'm a big fan of Led Zeppelin, but there comes a point where you have to draw a line under it and, you know, as we used to say, land it safely rather than crash it. We've exhausted our take on the subject. It's probably time for a more modern one. And we're already pretty old. So if we did a comeback in 20 years' time, it would be in bath chairs, you know, and I think it would be rather unseemly. So I really don't see it happening.
Yeah, you've said to other media outlets, you're getting on a bit. You say, oh, you're not that old, you're only 62. But do you think the next generation is as interested in fast cars as your generation? I mean, what could the next generation bring to the table, do you think?
In all honesty, no, I don't think they are, on the whole. They have many more distractions and plenty that we didn't have. I think the car has never been at a more interesting time in its evolution, apart from the time when it was invented, I suppose. So there should be lots to say about it, about the way it's being used, the way it's being made, you know, the connectivity of them. But I'm not quite sure how you do it. I mean, I try. I've written a few things about the future of cars and electric cars and so on, but it really takes, I think it will take some people in their 20s or early 30s with a very modern mindset and who can address sort of what you're alluding to. What the interest of today's young is in cars. It's going to be a different angle from the one we had, but I'm sure it must be there somewhere. I can't believe that car TV has come to an end.
Yeah, I mean, you, however, are and have been for a while something of a proponent of, you know, alternative sources of fuel for cars, moving away from combustion engines. I mean, isn't that something that's quite close to your heart and therefore something you could produce and present quite convincingly?
Yes, well, I hope so. The trouble is, I mean, when the internal combustion engine for my generation was what, in a sense, what made cars exciting, because it gave the car a mechanical character. It's a very flawed piece of technology, the internal combustion engine, so it has to be managed carefully. You know, it needs gearboxes, it has to idle, all these things. But we found that exciting, or at least we made it exciting because that's all we had. The problem with electric cars is they have an absolutely uniform mechanical character because they are electric motors. They're smooth and they're quiet and they're very, very easy to use. So you have to get excited about cars, you maybe need to get more excited about styling, the interior comfort, features. I mean, these are things we talked about before, but our sort of appreciation of the car was dominated by engines. but the world can move on. There aren't people now, lamenting the demise of the steam engine, as far as I know.
Not that I'm aware of, but once cars start driving themselves, I mean, you really are out of a job, aren't you, then, when it comes to presenting a car driving show?
Yes, well, I'm out of a job anyway, to be honest, because it's over. But funnily enough, I was in a self-driving car in California last week, one of the Waymos, and it was actually extremely impressive, if a bit unnerving. But I still think we're quite a long way away from driverless cars being on general sale or leased to the public. I think that's a long way off. It's still very much in the experimental stage, and it's a very complicated problem because you're talking about extremely advanced robotics, and robotics are always disappointing. I'm supposed to have a robot butler by now, but the most I can hope for really is a robotic vacuum cleaner that'll get stuck under the sofa. So I remain a bit cynical. It's fascinating technology, but I don't think it's just around the corner, not for most of us.
Yeah, electric vehicles very much in the headlines all the time, really, for lots of different reasons. There have been some attacks on Tesla cars, Tesla showrooms around the world. I mean, what do you make of all that? I mean, it looks like the brand's been quite politicised, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. I have a Tesla. I'm on my second Tesla, in fact, and I can't remember really a time when a car marque was seen as a political weapon or a political enemy. I mean, when I was a child, there were people who wouldn't buy German cars or Japanese cars because of World War II, but they were very old people even then. But it hasn't really happened in my time as a car journalist, and I find it a bit odd, to be honest, because yes, I accept that people have objections to Elon Musk's involvement in American politics, but why is that being taken out on a private individual's car in the UK or anywhere else in the world, for that matter? It strikes me as just pure vandalism or terrorism light. I have to say, nobody's dragged me out of mine yet and taken me to the gallows or anything like that, and nobody's set fire to it or written Nazi on it.
Are you happy with? Are you otherwise quite happy with your Tesla?
Yes, I mean, it's not perfect. I really bought it because I feel that if you're a car enthusiast and a car commentator, you have to take an interest in these things. You have to be part of the experiment, and I'm in a fortunate position because I can afford to be. On the whole, I like it, yes, and I like electric cars, but I didn't buy a Tesla because I admired Elon Musk so much. I really admired the work of his engineers. And I bought it as a car, not as a statement.
What about Chinese electric vehicles? They're obviously a bit of a thorn in the side of American and European car manufacturers. I don't know if you've driven any. What do you think of them?
Yes, I've driven a couple of small ones by BYD and so on, and they were really quite good. The Chinese car industry is developing apace, rather like the Japanese one did in the 70s and early 80s. It's coming. I don't think there's anything we can do about it unless you want to tariff them out of existence. But that rarely works well for the motor industry, and it doesn't generally give people better cars.
Okay, just pivoting back to Elon Musk and Tesla for a moment, then we'll move on. Do you think there's perhaps a bit of scope for some collaboration in the future, some sort of a tie-up, perhaps have Elon Musk as a co-presenter on future generations of Top Gear? What do you think?
Well, I think he would be quite biased, to be honest. So I think you would struggle to sell that. I mean, especially if it was on Top Gear on the BBC, I think that would be regarded as against the charter. So no, I suspect he's quite busy anyway. I think the commentators on cars in the future have to be people ideally in their 20s. Who are looking at the world through the eyes of a new generation, and who are its inheritors, and they must be out there somewhere. There are millions and millions and millions of people in the world, and there are still quite a few people who are interested in cars and the whole transport picture. Somewhere amongst those, you need 3 or 4 that can be put together to make a TV show. I don't believe it's that difficult.
You've tried your hand at other things, as well as presenting TV shows, you've got a country pub, the Royal Oak, in the west of England. That's a tough business, isn't it, running a pub?
Yes, I mean, I don't actually run it. We have a manager, and yes, it is extremely difficult to run a pub. I mean, we've just had to put up with, from yesterday, increases in the minimum wage, national insurance contributions, energy costs have gone up, everything's basically going up, insurance is going up, and the pub is actually very successful. It's very popular, but it still only just survives. And to be honest, that's partly because it's not tied to a brewery, so it doesn't have to pay anything back to the brewery. And it's owned by me and another man called Simon, who don't take anything out of it. So they don't have to satisfy the needs to pay a dividend to shareholders or anything like that. The pub is really, we'll have to regard it as a community service, I suppose. It pays the people who work for it very well and on time, which is as much as you can hope for, really. But I didn't buy the pub because I thought it was going to be a great money spinner. I didn't want it to shut because it's close to my country cottage. There wouldn't be a nearby pub if that one had shut. And owning a pub is a nice feeling, to be honest. A lot of us dreamt of it when we were younger. And a lot of people say, I'd love to own a pub. A lot of people think they can run a pub, but it's actually extremely difficult. And I wouldn't recommend going into it unless you are a professional in the hospitality industry. The hours are long and quite antisocial. There's every opportunity to get fat and drunk. The pay is not that brilliant, to be honest, and it's a struggle to keep those things open.
Jeremy Clarkson's got a pub as well. What's the difference in style, would you say, as you as a pub landlord and him?
Mine's much better. I think that's the main difference. I haven't actually been to Jeremy's pub. I've met a few people who have. It sounds like, from what I can gather, he's gone for a sort of mass throughput model. So he's got, hundreds of people queuing up to have his burger, whereas ours is a little bit more relaxed. It's a village pub where people come. The food is great. We've got a fabulous team of chefs. So mine would feel more like a regular English pub. It's not old-fashioned. It hasn't got horse brass on the walls or any of that twee stuff. There's no Morris dancing. I won't allow that. But it is just a pub.
OK, I mean, you say your pub's much better, and you make lots of jokes about Jeremy Clarkson and Richard Hammond. Of course, there was really great chemistry between the three of you, the sort of 20-plus years you spent working together. And, you're quoted as saying, I spent a third of my life with those two idiots. But when we hear you say things like that, we should take them with a good dose of affection, shouldn't we?
Yes, I mean, that is the British way, I'm afraid, when you work closely with people or you're, in the army or something like that. There is a lot of ribbing. It's a sign of acceptance in Britain, especially amongst British men. You are the most horrible to the people who you rely on the most.
What about something for the future that you might do next? I mean, obviously, you've ruled out a comeback on Top Gear, but, we are moving more away from TV shows, perhaps more towards podcasts. Might a podcast be a good idea for a James May comeback?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've got a few other things to do. I'm doing my Live Explorers show, and I'm doing some more stuff for Discovery and Channel 5, and I honestly thought I was going to retire this year, and this year has turned out to be the busiest I've had for quite a few. Quite a few people have asked me to do a podcast, but I'm not sure I have the strength left for it, to be honest, because the people who suggest it think it's easy, that you just stick a microphone on like this one that's in front of me now, and a recorder, and you just talk away, and millions of people will subscribe to it and think it's brilliant. But I don't think it's that simple. I think podcast is a bit like radio and your sort of television. It consumes a massive amount of material, and you've got to keep coming up with it. And I don't think I've got the strength.
OK, I've got another idea. I've got another idea for you. Your childhood career dream was to be an astronaut, I'm told. If that's not true, do correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that was Jeremy. No, Jeremy said he wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to be a fighter pilot.
You didn't want to be an astronaut?
No, not particularly.
OK.
I wanted to be a fighter pilot, which is sort of related.
My producer swears you wanted to be an astronaut, and I'm wondering whether perhaps how you'd have felt for those astronauts who were stuck on the International Space Station, and whether you thought you'd have managed being stuck up there in space for a few months with Jeremy Clarkson and Richard Hammond.
No, I think that would have been pretty disastrous, to be honest, because it's a confined space. I suspect weightlessness for an extended period makes you quite bad-tempered after a while. The food is not that exciting, is there? And there's no bar. So I don't think that would suit us in the slightest. We're very much a gravity-inspired trio.
All right, well, you're best known for sure for your car shows and your travel shows. So best car out there, what is it?
Oh, people ask me this all the time, and I never know the answer. I mean, I'm secretly a bit of a fan of mid-engine Ferraris. And I have one, a 458 Speciale, which was probably the greatest car I ever drove, or I thought was the greatest car I drove when I was working on the car show, so I bought one. I'm also a massive fan of small, simple things like the Fiat Panda, old Minis, the Toyota Aygo, anything small and simple. I'm not really an SUV type person. I find them slightly absurd for most people's lives and uses. I don't really quite know where that fad has come from. But I mean, if I had to choose a car, as they used to say in England, to see me out, so it's just one car that does everything, for the rest of my life, to be honest, it would probably be a Golf, because I think the answer to most automotive questions is the VW Golf. And there you go, you see, that's quite interesting, because nobody is setting fire to VW dealerships or vandalizing Golfs by writing Nazi on them, but you're driving a car from a company that was quite literally founded by Hitler.
You make a very good point there. You've got, of course, some of the cars that you just mentioned in your collection. I'm talking about that Ferrari and the Fiat Panda, I'm told you still own, but maybe you don't, maybe you've sold it. I mean, is there a thread to your collection of cars? You've got quite a lot of them, and, you know, if you're going from a Ferrari to a Fiat Panda, I mean, that's quite a range, isn't it?
Yes, they're virtually indistinguishable, to be honest. I don't know. There isn't it's not really a car collection. I've just ended up with too many cars. There isn't a theme, apart from that I've avoided boredom, I think. Although sometimes the idea of a very, very boring car is quite appealing. Something like the old VW Jetta. It's a car so utterly anonymous that it's actually quite admirable, because it simply functions as a car and displays nothing else and ekes out of you no emotion whatsoever, either love or hatred or anything in between. There's nothing there when you drive a VW Jetta, and I quite admire that.
Yeah, you live in London. You obviously don't like driving in London, and obviously where you drive a car means, you know, what you're going to get out of that car. And as you say, you don't like driving in London. Have you ever driven in the Middle East? I think you have. Tell us about that.
I have. I've driven in. I've definitely driven in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and a little bit. Well, we have driven through bits of Jordan, bits of Iraq. I have been to Egypt quite a bit, but I haven't driven there. I think that's about it, actually, for my Middle East driving experience. What do you make of the driving style in the Middle East? Well, as far as I remember, it was pretty good. I mean, the country with the most terrifying driving, it used to be Spain years ago, but they've become very sensible now. Some South American countries I've been in have had some pretty random driving, but I seem to remember that the driving in the Middle East seemed quite restrained on the whole. Also, I believe the police are quite tough on bad driving, aren't they? They certainly are. Yeah, you don't want to have too many traffic infractions here. Moving on from fight's quite big. Moving on from cars to travel shows, I mean, is there a country that stands out for you, or a region that stands out for you as being, you know, right up there, top of the list? Well, I have always been a massive fan of Japan, which is why I wanted to make that original one. I just find aesthetically, Japan is fascinating because, all the details, everything about it is just amazing to look at, and it's very meticulously organized. So that stands out. I mean, I'm not making any more travel shows. Amazon don't want those anymore, and to be honest, they're quite grueling to make. But I would have loved to have done the Middle East. We had one planned for the US, and we had one planned for South America, just loosely sketched out. And I find most places you go are pretty fascinating once you start talking to the people there, because that's actually what makes places. Architecture and food and so on is all very well, but it's actually mixing with people that makes the experience of traveling rewarding. And people are interesting everywhere.
They are. And just looking at what we're going to see from you next and where we might see you next, you're doing this stand-up live show. You go on tour later this year. Just tell us a bit about what that show is all about.
It's called Exploration from the Ice Age to the Space Age, which turns out to be an enormous subject to cover in one evening. But it's essentially a theatre stage show presented by me with audio-visual things and a few special effects and so on. We're actually still working on it. I've been working on the script earlier today. So it goes around Australia, New Zealand, and then Singapore, and then later in the year it's going to come to Britain for a stint. And if it works and people like it, we may then continue it into other bits of the world. But basically, if you come, I hope people do, it sort of addresses the philosophy of exploration and the mindset and why humanity has done it. And we've always done it, and we all do it individually at a very small level. Some people take it to extremes and they, completely change the face of the world by colonization, discovery, trade, all these things. So it's not the whole story because, as I said, it's enormous. But we've sort of plucked out a few good uns, a few bangers, as da kids would say, and those will all go into the performance. But as I say, we're still very much working on the script, so I can't tell you exactly what's in it yet.
Okay, we wouldn't want to spoil it. Just before we wrap up, I've been told by one of my producers to ask you your thoughts on the new Dacia Sandero. What do you have to say about that, Mr. May?
The old one, the first and second ones, I was always a big fan of because it was one of those, I don't think it is anymore, but it was the cheapest new car in Britain, which when I was a lad was always something sort of Soviet, like a Lada or a Moscovich. And to be honest, they were a bit ropey. But the Sandero was really an old Renault Clio with a different body on. And Dacia is actually part of Renault. And it was a pretty good car. It was quite basic, but it was a good car at a very low price. Now, it started to, as with all these things, it started to grow a bit. And all cars are growing too much. They're becoming too bloated and too wide and so on. But it's still pretty appealing. And Dacia now make the Spring, which I drove a few weeks ago, which is not only at the moment the cheapest new car available in Britain, it's also electric. And, for a long time, people have been saying electric cars are all very well, but they're too expensive. But now the cheapest new car you can buy is an electric one. So I suppose now we'll find out if people actually want them.
Sure. And just to wrap up, we're out of time. But I mean, do you think basically we are at the end of the road for cars and car ownership as we've known them throughout our lives, James?
In some ways, yes. I think we've arrived at a time when we have to reassess the car and how we use it. Now, I say this as someone who loves cars because I do, but I feel we should use them with discretion and carefully so that they are not ultimately taken away from us, not by the man or government or anything like that, but by the weight of public opinion. I don't think cars are very effective in towns and cities. I think they're actually a great way of getting between them. But around town, they're clutter. And I don't drive in London if I can possibly avoid it. The only time I take the car into London is if I've got to collect something really big, like a vase or a dining chair or something. The rest of the time I use public transport and bicycles because to be honest, it's quicker.
Yeah, totally agree with you. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. If you're ever in the Middle East, I do hope we'll be able to persuade you to come and talk to us in our studios. James May, British TV host, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thanks for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow.